There's a lot going on in this movie.
It was like I was watching it for the first time.
I like this movie.
It has a special place in my heart.
Very close to my heart.
This was a good one.
I want to like this movie.
What? Seriously?
I loved it.
Very flat, kind of boring.
This movie blows me away. This movie turns me on.
Terrible. It is terrible. All these keys everywhere. Influences, baby.
Huge fan.
That's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, they're dead. They're all messed up.
Hello and welcome out there in podcast and YouTube land. You have reached Johnny Has the Keys, a podcast and YouTube channel where two guys get together. We talk about movies, specifically horror and science fiction. Although this season we are broadening our range just a wee bit, but we talk about those films, television series, shows, whatever key influences on them, and then things that they in turn influenced going down the road through time and space and genres and things like that. We've been doing it for a while. We're unscripted. We're coming at each other not knowing what we're going to say, but we would love to hear from you and what you have to say about it. If you found us, how did you find us? Let us know down below in the comments and tell us all that. Subscribe, join, relax, donate, give money, have a beer, whatever. We've been doing it for quite a few years now, and this season we're more than halfway through, I think. Tim will correct me on that. But anyway, my name is David. I'm here. Tim is my good friend and co-conspirator in genre-esqueness. Tim, how are you? It's March.
Right. A couple of things of note. One is that we're probably 3/4 of the way through, because this will be our 28th episode of the season.
Sweet.
And the other thing is that while you were talking, I couldn't help but feel like a Brady. Like, remember the old show, The Brady Bunch, where they were all in their little boxes in the tic-tac-toe thing, and they would look down at each other?
Yep. Totally true.
And I noticed I was like having to be quiet while you talked, and I was like watching my head, and I was like, oh, I'm Bobby Brady. A little bit old, but...
Or Hollywood Squares.
I'm more like Alice, I guess, in age.
Yeah. I could be Paul Lind, and you can be Victor Buono.
No. That's a good choice. That's great for today's episode.
First words that came to mind. That's crazy. But,
that's hilarious. Well, we usually break the ice with a little bit of what we did in our genre week.
Yeah.
And I wanted to do something a little more on the classical side, since we're going back to some 60s classics today. I went back a little further with a documentary I caught on Turner Classic Movies called Lon Chaney, 1,000 Faces.
Okay.
Oh, I just realized why I feel like Peter Brady's, because I'm on top of you, and usually... No, that is right. It is usually that way on my screen. Okay, sorry. Anyway, Lon Chaney, 1,000 Faces. Most of the folks out there that listen to us, I think, are of age that they would remember who Lon Chaney is. But some of you out there may not, so I will give a brief introduction. If you can see that picture in the poster behind me is the Phantom of the Opera. He was the original Phantom of the Opera in the 1927 classic, I think it was, 1922 maybe. This documentary blew me away. I was not expecting it to be that great, and the people in it are what made it great. And it was bizarre too. Like, it started with the last 20 minutes of Phantom of the Opera. And the whole time I was watching it, I was like, am I just watching the movie? This is supposed to be a documentary. And literally, it went from him being discovered, being chased through the streets, and thrown into the river or whatever. I was like, okay, I guess we're just going to see the end of this movie. And then the actual documentary starts. It goes on to the man, Lon Chaney, who was a silent movie star and makeup artist, renowned for his various characterizations, and obviously celebrated for horror films. This was narrated by Kenneth Branagh, which that gives it some cred right there in my book.
Yep.
I don't know if I mentioned this is a 25-year-old doc. It came out in 2000. It features commentary from Forrest J. Ackerman, Ray Bradbury, Lon Chaney Jr., Ron Chaney, the great grandson of Lon Chaney, Sarah Karloff, Boris Karloff's daughter, and Orson Welles. So you've got some cred there as well. As far as a synopsis, it is a documentary. It's hard to give a synopsis, but hosted by Kenneth Branagh, the documentary showcases silent screen actor Lon Chaney, often called the godfather of horror films, who was famed for the elaborate and often painful lengths he would go to make himself up for the characters he played. Included are clips from many films and interviews from many actors who were fans of his work. Did you know he made one sound movie?
No.
Yeah, he made one movie sound. It was a remake of the film The Unholy Three, were it not for his death, he, rather than Bela Lugosi, would have been cast as Dracula in 1931, which makes perfect sense to me. For those of you that don't know, he has one of the more famous missing films in history, London After Midnight, where he actually played a vampire, a very creepy vampire. Anyway, I have always been a fan. My mother was a movie fan. She used to make me watch that movie, Man of a Thousand Faces, with Jimmy Cagney in it, which is a biopic on Lon Chaney. Anyway, I found it fascinating, and I recommend it. It's a good documentary.
Very fascinating. I know that he was a huge influence on Dick Smith. And I was a huge fan of Dick Smith as a kid and bought his makeup kits and his books and all of that. And just when you hear of Chaney's dedication is amazing at the time of the way he would contort and twist and do and hurt himself physically.
He would put things in his eyes.
These parts.
Yeah, to make them go down, and things in his nose to make them go up. He did a lot of weird stuff.
And contort his body, like for Hunchback and everything, the way he would do this craziness. But yeah, it sounds interesting, and that's a great behind the scenes I would love to see, because we both are fascinated with movies anyway. I'm going to.
Yeah, and I have since watching this, I have now seen Phantom of the Opera twice recently. The original silent version, and it is on our list. It's one of those I need to probably bump up, either that or Hunchback, because I don't know that we've done any with Lon Chaney. I don't think we have.
We haven't.
Okay.
We haven't.
Yeah, we should do that.
We've done Mummy, we did Nosferatu, we did Dracula, but we haven't done Chaney. We've done Karloff and, and the rest of them pretty much, but not Mr. Chaney. So that'd be fun.
I think so.
You were way back in the before time, and I was fairly modern. I finally caught up and watched Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer, which is not really totally in our genre, but somewhat, because pretty much at the time it was considered almost science fiction. And this won all the Oscars, finally got Christopher Nolan his Oscar. We both like Cillian Murphy, and if you haven't seen it, you should watch it just for his performance. It is fascinating to watch how he approaches these scenes. Emily Blunt is incredible in it. Matt Damon is good in it, somewhat miscast, but I still think he works and does it well. But just the world building and the pacing and the execution and the storytelling, it's a phenomenal movie. For those of you who don't know and have been living under a rock for the past 4 years, came out in 23. It's basically the story of Oppenheimer and how he was essentially headhunted by the government to develop and help develop the first nuclear weapon, and how Oak Ridge was built, how Los Alamos was built, what went into it. But it's all from his personal story. And it has cameos by Albert Einstein and Fermi and Braun and all of these incredible people of history at this time that all came together to hopefully stop the German and the Nazis and create this weapon of horrible mass destruction. And it delves into the guilt of that, but not, I was thinking it was going to be way too much of that. Because his big quote is, "I have become death." He's quoting, is it scripture? I'm not sure what the phrase is from. I think it is scripture.
Ingmar
But
Bergman.
uh, yeah, that's it. But I thought it was going to delve way too much into that, but it didn't. It dealt with the practicalities of what they were trying to do and the global impact of what they were trying to do, and mostly from his personal aspect. When I was watching it and I finished it, I thought this would be a really cool double feature for us to maybe, although it's a long film, but a double feature for us to do with the other one, the
Day after.
no, with the other oppressed genius. Benedict Cumberbatch plays him.
Oh, the code guy.
He broke Enigma. Yeah. I
Yeah,
can't
he
remember the
was
film right now.
I can't either. He was gay. I remember it though. I remember that.
Yeah, that was a big deal
Yeah,
because
because they could blackmail him or something. Yeah,
well, they put him in prison.
right.
Essentially, they arrested him and he died, I think, in prison.
I can't think of that either.
He had essentially, he and Oppenheimer were the two that essentially stopped World War II. These two men almost single-handedly, with their vision and genius, essentially stopped World War II. So that might be interesting for us to look at as a combination, although it's not either of our genres. But
How was Robert Downey Jr. in it?
I was just about to say, the big surprise in it, Robert Downey Jr. is so not Tony Stark in it. It's great.
Okay.
It's really good.
A lot of people, it was a little controversial that he won that Oscar because there was some other really good people up against him.
I think it was great. I do not think it was Oscar worthy based on what I remember from the ceremonies last year
Yeah.
and who he was up against. Because I thought a couple of the others were better, but I had not seen Oppenheimer at the time, so I couldn't really judge. But I think it was great. It was a great performance. I think Cillian Murphy was much better, of course, but he had much more to do.
The guy you were thinking about is Alan Turing, and it was called The Imitation Game.
Imitation Game, Turing, Alan Turing, yep. And that's another one that's this gifted genius who's fighting against bureaucracy, but also using bureaucracy to get what he wants and
I haven't
using
seen
the
it.
money. It's really good, Tim. It's great as well. But anyway, that's when I was off on a nuclear tangent of scary, horrible things coming to get us.
Well, wow, what a segue. We go from classic horror, which works for a segue, to nuclear explosions, which is what happens when you put two rival actresses in a movie together that they both desperately need, and neither one of them can stand each other. And I am talking about, well, two films actually, because we're doing a double feature. And look at David go all black and white. I guess I should
ready.
do that as well.
You should, because we're going back in time to deal with this.
We're going to do a double feature on two classic movies from the 60s known as Whatever Happened to Baby Jane and Hush, Hush, Sweet Charlotte.
A double feature.
I have been wanting to do these for almost a year now because I rewatched these about a year back and had forgotten just how good they were, and also had forgotten that they were both Oscar-nominated movies as well, because that threw me for a surprise. I was not aware of that. I guess what we need to do is break it up and just start with Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, which stars Bette Davis and Joan Crawford. The second film would have starred Joan Crawford, but she ended up getting fired, and they put Olivia de Havilland in her place. A quick synopsis of Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. Fated actresses Blanche and Baby Jane Hudson live together in an old house in Hollywood. Jane was by far the most famous when she performed with their father in vaudeville, but as they get older, it is Blanche who became known as a fine actress. And Jane resents that big time. Blanche is now confined to a wheelchair, and Jane is firmly in control of their lives. As time goes by, she exercises more and more control over her sister by intercepting her letters and ensuring that few, if anyone, from the outside has contact with her. as Jane slowly loses her mind. I don't know if that's really apt. I think she probably had lost her mind long before. She torments her sister to even greater extremes, and I will leave it at that.
Mm-hmm.
What are your first impressions or first memories of this film?
I think I'm trying to I was trying to remember when I watched it and when I was taking notes. I don't think I ever watched this movie all the way through. I think this is one of those that I would always catch on reruns somewhere or on Shock Theater or something like that. And I always think of it as either it's before Bird or after Bird. And then watching it this time straight all the way through, I went, wow, Bird is pretty early. So
Bird, what are you referring to?
When she serves her parrot.
Oh, the bird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that in my mind, that's how I always equated it, is either this is before the parrot dinner or
It's a parakeet. It's not a parrot. It's not that big. If it was that big, that would be shocking.
Yeah.
They leave that for the rat.
But I have to preface the whole thing for today's episode in that I'm not a Bette Davis fan, never have been.
I know you're not. I knew this going in.
And so it's hard for me to distance my opinion from her being her personality, trying to do these films or not. Also knowing just what little I did in research, I'm sure you'll know much more, but little I did in research, part of what I think Aldrich wanted, in my opinion, is this controversy between them and the fact that their private lives were so public and their feud was so public. And that added to the mystique of both these films, really. Even though de Havilland is in Charlotte, Joan Crawford had a huge influence on that film. So I think
she actually started filming it. They had to cut the stuff out, throw stuff away that she had filmed. Yeah.
So I think, but watching it again, I guess, so again, going back to opinion, watching it all the way through and everything else, I think the histrionics that Davis does in this actually do work. I think Joan Crawford is really good in this and such a good counterpoint to her. I had read in notes that even her own daughter thought that Davis was doing too much makeup, but I thought it played really well and made sense of a person who's losing it and probably didn't take her makeup off every night. She just caked on more to make it look better.
And Davis did that. That was not a makeup artist. She did that herself. Yeah.
Correct. I saw that she had done that as her. And I thought the opening was great. Not even any credits. We're we're in the movie and we're going and we're singing and we're on stage and all of those personalities are developed within 2 freaking scenes. We know how all 3 of them are, and mom.
And mom and dad, yeah.
Yeah. And so I thought it was really well paced, well structured. I like Victor Buono in it. I thought he did
well, we'll get to it, but I was going to say, I think Robert Aldrich is a very underrated director. I think he's really talented.
I do too, especially after the second one. But and I can't remember other films that he has done.
The only other one that he's really well known for is The Dirty Dozen.
Okay.
But he also did 2 movies in the 50s. I'll find it in a minute. He did two movies in the 50s that are like on an AFI list that I've never even heard of, and now I want to see them. I'll let you know what those are when I find them in a minute.
But I agree with you. I think he is very underrated. Great camera work, great cinematography, excellent working, of course, with these personalities and more personalities that he had to deal with in the second one.
Oh, my God. If you watch that show Feud that was a 10-episode, I think, FX series that Ryan Murphy did, where Susan Sarandon plays Bette Davis and Jessica Lange plays Joan Crawford, and it's all behind the scenes of this movie going into Charlotte. And if you knew what all he was dealing with and trying to manage them while making this movie, it is great. Alfred Molina plays Aldrich in it,
Oh, okay.
and
It's
Stanley
a
Tucci is Jack Warner.
It's yeah, having to deal at that time in Hollywood with the personalities he had to deal with, and
Yeah.
still get his movie made. It says a lot that the final product looks as impressive as it does.
Right. And he's also dealing with it above, too, because he's got Jack Warner breathing down his neck,
Of
too.
course.
Yeah. My first memory of this movie, though, I had never heard of this. Yeah, I've been reading Fangoria and been a horror movie person. Well, I've been a horror movie person since I was a child, and then in the '80s, I really got into it with Fangoria and video. But I had never heard of this movie, and our friend Dee Oswald said, "Oh my God, you have to see this movie," and she showed it to me, and I've loved it ever since. I will say that as an older person now, I kind of like Charlotte better than Baby Jane, the movie Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte.
Okay, I was saving that, but yeah, I much prefer Charlotte to Baby Jane.
Yeah, and I think that the performances are toned down. Obviously, they're less melodramatic than they are in this. But
There's also more plot shifts. It's a scarier movie that, to me, than Baby Jane. It's more like a double indemnity. Who's scamming? What's going on? Where's the plot twists? So it's more engaging, I think, than Baby Jane. Baby Jane is a character study that devolves into what horrible atrocity is going to happen next.
yeah, it is. It is like that. It's like what?
And there are
scene's
some
coming next.
direct, huge keys coming from Baby Jane, of course.
Yeah, for sure. As far as background, we talked about Robert Aldrich a little bit. Did you know there was another director, though, that they tried to get first to do it?
No,
Yeah, they tried to get Hitchcock to do this. Can you imagine?
it doesn't have. Yeah,
It
I mean,
doesn't have a pretty woman in it. That's why he didn't do it, I'm sure.
well, yeah, he'd have to recast Joan Crawford as some blonde ice princess. I could see that just because what makes this film work, the underlying thing all the way through, is this tension that Aldrich creates. This what's going to happen next? Is she going to kill the maid? What is she doing downtown with this costume? I don't understand. You're on edge the entire movie because you don't know how erratic Baby Jane is going to get. And so, I could definitely see Hitchcock doing that.
Oh yeah, I think Hitchcock would have probably made a better movie, even though I like Robert Aldrich's movie. But he was very popular because he had just come off Psycho 2 years earlier, and the reason he turned it down was because he was developing The Birds and he was busy.
Yeah.
And I'm glad because I like both those movies, and I'm glad we have those movies instead.
Yes.
But Robert Aldrich, to give you a bit of history, he entered the film industry in 1941. He's one of those guys that came up from the bottom. He got a job as a production clerk at RKO. He soon worked his way up to script clerk, then became an assistant director, a production manager, and an associate producer. And then he started directing television in the 50s. So by the time the 60s rolled around, he was seasoned.
Yeah.
But he did do a couple of movies in the 50s that I said are on the AFI list. One is called Vera Cruz. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
And one is called Kiss Me Deadly.
I've heard of that. Heard that
Okay.
title.
Well, they're on my list now because I want to see them now that I see that they're getting acclaim. They're called to be two of the most influential films of the 1950s. So.
Well, Kiss Me Deadly definitely sounds interesting.
What else? He has, in his course of or career, he has directed 5 different actors in Oscar-nominated performances, including several from these films: Victor Buono, Benny Davis, Agnes Moorehead, and then also Ian Bannon and John Cassavetes.
Two great ones.
Yeah. And then in 1975 to 1979, he was the president of the Directors Guild,
Okay.
which is cool.
The only misstep I think he did from a direction angle in this one really is a couple of times where I think Davis goes way over the top, and he could have toned it down. Can we take one more take, Betty, and just not as loud, maybe?
And
But
if she was the consummate actress too, if he would have asked her that, she would have done it.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. I don't I don't have a disregard for Betty Davis's craft. I just don't personally think it's as good as she thinks it is. The only misstep, I think, is the dubbing. He dubbed Joan Crawford's voice over Betty Davis talking on the phone a couple of times to people, and it doesn't work.
The reason he did that is because she could not imitate Joan Crawford, and it sounded terrible, and they just ended up having to dub it. It is bad. It doesn't look good, but they just couldn't get around it.
But I even started getting scared for the next door neighbor and her daughter. I was thinking, Baby Jane's going to go over there and hacksaw them to death or something. Something's going on.
The suspense in this movie is off the charts. Literally, when she's driving home from the bank and you know that cleaning woman is trying to get into the door to save, all that stuff is off the charts. You're like, oh my God, she's going to get caught. She's going to
hurry. Yeah. Yeah.
And what's she do? She takes a hammer to her head. Wow. That's pretty rough for 1962.
Oh, yeah. That was the other thing. Aldrich wasn't afraid of violence. Very Hitchcock-like, in my opinion. I have that as one of my keys. Is he wasn't afraid to show us violence and almost like a Grand Guignol horror thing right in the middle of this domestic dispute.
Right. And it's funny that you say Grand Guignol, because those books that these movies, I never got to the writer, Henry Farrell. The books were classified as Grand Guignol. People use that word when they reviewed his books. He penned Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, and then when the film started the craze, he wrote it out, and he had a short story called Whatever Happened to Cousin Charlotte, which evolved into the next film. But he also, I have them listed somewhere, but I don't have them here. I'll get to that later. He just kept churning out titles that were very similar so that they would sell. Obviously, he was on a kick.
Yeah.
And then before we move on to scenes, background, the film was a smash hit upon its initial release. It recouped its original budget in only 11 days and grossed $9 million. If you adjusted that to today's dollars, it would have been $72 million. And Jack Warner was like, who wants to see Betty Davis and Joan Crawford in a movie now? They're old. No one cares. And they rode this thing to the top. You know, it was, and they desperately needed it, because we always hear about how Hollywood has been horrible in the past as far as casting women, especially when they get over a certain age. Imagine how bad it was in the early 60s with these two.
Yeah.
So it's a story of triumph as well for the actresses. But all right, I think that's enough on background. Do you want to talk about some scenes? There's so many scenes in this that are iconic.
Again, my
already
first
mentioned one.
Yeah, the bird scene is good, but the whole plant earlier with Blanche's Baby Jane. No, Blanche is
Joan Crawford.
Joan Crawford. The whole plant earlier with Baby Jane taking the parrot or the parakeet out of the room.
I'll clean its cage.
Oh yeah,
it flew out the window.
And then it flew out the window, and then suddenly it's on my plate. And so that all together sets up the whole next scene, which is her terrified to even open the tray anymore and eat. So that was really good.
And to me, that's a large part of the horror of this. Not the fact that she's just a prisoner, but the fact that she's being starved to death. She's feeding her stuff that no one would eat. So she's not eating. So she's getting weaker and weaker. Yeah. So there's a lot of little things going on that are just horrible.
And I think my next one is going along with his whole, like I said, this underpinning of tension that he keeps all through the movie. The very first meeting with Edwin, when Bueno's character shows up and they have the interview and everything else, and just excellent acting, I think, on both of them. Of him trying to figure out, is this lady crazy or not? And is the money worth her being crazy or not?
Exactly what it is.
Yeah.
He's
And
willing to
her
put up
saying,
with it to make the
I
money.
don't know if I should trust him. Is he sincere that I am really as good as I know I am? Or that it was just a really great scene. And the way he staged it with Buono going over and looking at the mirror and the footlights and everything and thinking, uh-oh, I'm in a loony bin. It was really... That was one of them. I love that scene. I
love when they actually are rehearsing, and I think Blanche hears her singing the Letter to Daddy song, and she's like, what the hell is going on? Because she can't see anything. She's locked upstairs in her room. Other scenes, I think the end scene is fabulous, where she's dancing on the beach, just totally out of it. It's very memorable. That's a scene you'd see on like a Hollywood reel at the Oscars, I think.
I also think it's very Hitchcock, too, that he just pulls that POV, God's eye, back as the cops are swarming and all of this. And we never get a denouement. We never get a what happened later. It's a, this is where we end and we're done.
Yeah, I'm assuming Blanche lives. She wasn't quite dead at the time, but
maybe.
Who knows?
I don't know. I also have in my notes for scenes the whole Elvira coming to the rescue scene, unfortunately. Like you said, that whole thing is great. And you can see Crawford, see her in the background with the hammer, and she's like, ah! And then boom.
Or the scene where she throws the note to the next door neighbor, and then Betty Davis pulls in and sees it laying there on the concrete and picks it up.
The tension is great.
It's awesome.
Good. Yeah, lots of suspense. Good suspense.
Really good suspense. I had another scene and now I've lost it. Oh, well, if I think about it, I'll come back to it. I guess we can just move on to cast because we are going to be talking for a minute about these two films.
Yeah.
Before this movie was made, the director Richard Rush was also in talks to acquire the film rights, and he intended to cast Hugh O'Brien and Agnes Moorehead. So, and Jennifer West. I don't know who Jennifer West is. So I'm assuming Agnes Moorehead would have played Baby Jane, and that wouldn't have been too bad either. I don't
Not at
think.
all. I could easily have seen that.
It's just ironic that Agnes Moorehead went on to be in Hush, Hush, Sweet Charlotte. So she's another great actress. But we know Betty Davis was Jane Hudson. She's a 2-time Oscar winner. She's had 11 nominations, including this film. She won for All About Eve and Jezebel, I believe, but she was also in Now Voyager, Dark Victory, The Letter. Fans of our podcast will know the last time we talked about her was in Burnt Offering. So this is not the first movie we've done with Betty Davis in it. I, on a personal note, know that you have never been a fan of hers, so I was a little reluctant to do these movies. But I want you to know, and you know, that I have been deep diving into Turner Classic Movies for a couple of years now, and I have gone back and watched a slew of her old movies when she was young, and she was phenomenal. She was super good. So what you're seeing in these movies, even though it is overplayed, especially this film, maybe not as much in Charlotte, I think it's intentional. I don't think it's because she's just a ham. I think she wanted Baby Jane to be a caricature of herself, but I don't know.
I do think that for her and Crawford both, one of the reasons for the feud, I think, and one of the reasons for all the histrionics and stuff is the fact that the ego took over. And they both started thinking they were a lot better than they were, in my opinion. So...
And that reminds me of the scene that I was going to talk about. It's the scene where she discovers that she was not responsible for Blanche being in a wheelchair. Blanche pulled the wool over her eyes, and that's what probably pushed her into deeper insanity, for lack of better words. The fact that she thought she was responsible for putting Blanche in that wheelchair. and all along she wasn't.
So let's talk about that. That seemed to me to be a Heller thing, not a director thing. That seemed to be something that he thought would be his little plot twist holdover till the very end. Of thing.
If I had read the book, I could tell you, but I haven't read the book, so I don't know.
And was that really necessary? Baby Jane is so gone by the time they're at the beach that there's no repercussion or there's no nothing comes from the fact that Blanche says that. Blanche may be absolving herself.
I think it gives you a last glimpse of their humanity. It gives you a last glimpse of, oh, they really were sisters and all this did happen. It gives you a sense of less heightened character. It's the real sister.
Well, what I liked about it, and then I'll tell you what I disliked. What I liked about it was it suddenly gave justification for Blanche's being so passive. And Elvira going up, going, you need to get out of here, and you need to, and she's like, no, Baby Jane is she's just tired. And it's because she feels guilt that she actually attempted to kill her.
That, and she's also doing what her mother told her to do.
Right. So I could see
to look out
that
for her.
But again, I just think there's no last little moment of even Baby Jane like laying down beside her going, it's okay, or forgiving her, or doing, nothing comes from her giving the admission at the end.
Yeah.
And maybe it's different in the novel. Maybe there is more of an internal. But I do think it's a unique twist. And Heller and Aldrich both seem to be really good at writing these twists that go till the very end. So it's one of my keys. We'll talk about that. So.
Okay. Well, aside from Bette Davis, 6 other actresses were considered for this role. They were Ingrid Bergman, Susan Hayward, Rita Hayworth, Katharine Hepburn, Jennifer Jones, and Ginger Rogers. All of those to me fit because they're probably the same age with exception to Jennifer Jones. I think Jennifer Jones was younger than any of the others. But all the others would have been Bette Davis's age or close. Makes sense. They were looking for an old star. Joan Crawford played Blanche Hudson. She is a one-time Oscar winner for Mildred Pierce. She was nominated 3 times, and she's in a lot lesser-known films. She's a little older than Betty. I want to say like 2 years, and she even, I think, did some silent films. And she descended badly, like Bela Lugosi, into B-horror movies. So she was already on her way down before Betty started doing that stuff. She did the movie Straitjacket, which was a William Castle movie. She did Berserk. Her last film, I think I talked about on our show for a genre week a few years back, it was called Trog, where she's a scientist with a caveman.
Yep.
It is so bad that it is hysterical. We should probably just watch it. It is really, really bad. She did, however, have one glimpse of greatness there toward the end, in our opinion, probably not in America's opinion, when she did Spielberg's first outing on The Night Gallery.
Yep.
Which was a pilot.
Television directorial debut.
Yeah, it was Spielberg's directorial debut on television. It was a Rod Serling project, and she was the lead in it. So some other actresses were considered for her role as well. Tallulah Bankhead, Claudette Colbert, Olivia de Havilland, and Marlene Dietrich, which that means it's the same thing, all the same age.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, he definitely wanted that demographic.
Yeah, for sure. One pleasant surprise in this movie is Victor Buono, who plays Edwin Flagg. Victor died young. He is aptly described in things I read about him as Charles Lawton-esque. He is very much like a Charles Lawton actor.
Very.
Presence, I guess. He was loved and often returned to playing, or he loved and often returned playing Falstaff in Shakespearean production. So he was a Shakespearean actor. Yep. Falstaff is a very beloved and reoccurring character in several Shakespeare plays. We know him, though, as recurring bad guys from 60s television,
Of course.
including Count Carlos Manzeppi on The Wild Wild West and King Tut on Batman, which is what I remember him more for.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, and he died tragically young. He was only 43 when he died.
Oh, wow. I didn't know
Yeah.
that.
And he was somewhat closeted, but I think only in the public eye. I'm pretty sure most of his friends knew that he was gay, including Betty Davis, who did befriend him and got him, I think, the gig on Charlotte. In regards to relationships and the questioning of his sexuality, he was quoted as saying, "I've heard or read about actors being asked the immortal question, 'Why have you never married?' They answered with the immortal excuse, 'I just haven't found the right girl.' Because I'm on the hefty side, no one's asked me that yet. If they do, that's the answer I'll give. After all, it was good enough for Monty Clift and Salminio," which
Well,
we both know were gay.
yes.
That's funny to me, though.
I think this part, as written, would be an actor's dream anyway. It's just to have the scenes with your mom and then the scenes with Baby Jane and how to have all the layers that go into that. And are you a good guy or are you a bad guy? Are you only out for a buck or do you have a heart? And he played it so well. It's a
Very
great
well.
performance.
So
Really
much
good.
that he was nominated for an Oscar. But he also, I think he won. Did he win?
No.
Oh no. Okay. I'll get to it then because I think that I know he was nominated. Anyway, also what you said as far as this being a great role, can you imagine if someone came to you and you're like just your average actor, not well known, and said, "I want you to be in a movie with Betty Davis and Joe Crawford"? Hell yeah.
Sure. I'll do it.
And then lastly, well, first of all, there was another person considered for Edwin Flagg, and it was Peter Lawford. He was originally cast, but after accepting, withdrew due to family concerns, because at the time he was John F. Kennedy's brother-in-law, and he felt that it would reflect badly on the Kennedy administration, which I find hilarious. You never hear about any movies affecting presidencies, really, do you? I can't think of any.
No, not really. No.
And then the role of Liza Bates, this is one-off because this is just a story that people should know that may not know. Liza Bates was the teenage daughter of the next-door neighbor, Mrs. Bates. She was played by Barbara Merrill, as in B.D. Merrill, as in the daughter of Betty Davis and Gary Merrill.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Gary, it wasn't Betty Davis's real daughter. She was adopted by Betty when they married, and Betty was doing her a favor by getting Bob Aldrich to cast her in this, and she's horrible. And I don't know if you notice, but a lot of the times when she has lines, they focus on her mother instead of her, even though she's talking.
Yep.
And that's why. And this plays a huge part in the miniseries because Betty's having to deal with the fact that her daughter is not an actress. So even though she was hoping it would be her break or whatever. So
Okay.
that's all I have on casting. As far as awards, Davis and Buono both, or Buono, however you say it, were nominated for Oscars for their performances. Davis lost to Anne Bancroft in The Miracle Worker. Buono lost to Ed Begley in The Sweet Bird of Youth, which I actually just watched last week.
Well, and while you're on awards, I have to say,
Sure.
what did they win? They won costumes, I think, right?
It definitely won costumes, and I'm pretty sure it won black and white cinematography.
Oh, yeah, because they separated them.
Well, here it is right here. The film was nominated for cinematography, sound, and won for costume design. So it was nominated for cinematography, but it didn't win. I think Charlotte won.
Oh, the next year. But
Yeah.
1962, doing the research on it, I was going, oh my God, we should do just a separate Patreon thing just on that year.
Oh, we can. A top
Because-
five.
The releases that year, just listen to these. Of course, whatever happened to Baby Jane. Days of Wine and Roses,
Just saw
Manchurian
that.
Candidate, Miracle Worker, Music Man, Lolita, Who Shot Liberty Valance, Cape Fear, To Kill a Mockingbird, Lawrence of Arabia. All
No, but those are
in
not
1 year.
horror science fiction movies.
No, but we should. Oh my God! For cinema, holy crap! What a year!
I
That's
just watched
amazing.
Days of Wine and Roses last week too.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's well, Jack Lemmon's just amazing. Davis and Buono also were nominated for BAFTAs. No,
Okay.
excuse me. The actresses were nominated for BAFTAs. Davis and Buono were nominated for Golden Globes. And this
Okay.
movie is on the 1001 movies you must see before you die list, which is
Really?
ironic because Charlotte is not. And I think Charlotte's the better movie.
I agree with you.
But this one's
wholeheartedly.
more iconic, and I will give them that. This movie is always going to be more iconic than Charlotte.
Well, yeah, you have the two in it as opposed to de Havilland. And
Oh, and one last mention. In 2021, just 4 years ago, it was selected for preservation in the United States National Film Registry in the Library of Congress for being culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant.
yeah, see, that's helps support your argument too that Aldrich is underrated.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't even nominated for director this year, so I think that's a mistake.
I don't even know if he was ever nominated. Surely he was nominated for Dirty Dozen. That was a big movie, wasn't it?
It was a big movie. I'm not sure about awards.
Yeah. So before we move on to keys, did you have anything else you wanted to say about this film, trivia-wise?
The only
or-
thing I have for modern audiences, so I do have a mention that this was considered Grand Guignol or Grand Guignol-esque, and that, which is now translated. We had this last year when we were doing Nosferatu on stage and talking about we had a very Grand Guignol approach. And most of the youngsters or the Gen Zs or Gen Xs equate that to like torture porn. And it's not. It is body horror and
Oh, it
graphic.
can be, but it's not necessarily.
correct.
It could be Gothic without any gore at all.
Correct. And that's still Grand Guignol, but not torture porn. That's what
I
was
associate it with Penny Dreadfuls.
thinking. Yeah. I
Those
agree with
words
that.
seem to be interchangeable to me.
That's always, to me, the Grand Guignol approach, too. Yeah. So it could be very Gothic and monstery and EC Comics-y.
But a lot of
to me.
people feel like Clive Barker was too, and he was extremely gory.
Yes. But I think he's also more Grand Guignol than torture.
Yeah, I don't associate it with torture at all, really.
Well, when Grand Guignol first started in France, it was that. It was body horror theater. It was effects that you were doing in front of people live that they wouldn't see anywhere
Like
else.
the Chamber of Horrors type stuff.
Correct. And some
Yeah.
of that did involve dismemberment and or bizarre gore effects. But done as part of a storytelling application, not as just a subgenre.
You know who the modern equivalent of that is? Alice Cooper.
Well, oh yeah, for stage, yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
He'll bring a guillotine out, cut his head off. He'll hang himself. It's
So-
very Grand Guignol or whatever.
In doing that research, I saw Grand Dane or Grand Dame Guignol, which is a subgenre, they said, but it's more easily translated as a subgenre called psychobiddy.
Psycho
Which
Biddy.
supposedly this is the movie that started that.
It is. It is. And I have a little bit on that as well. I was going to read. Oh, shit, man. My notes are so long, I can't get to the bottom of them. Surely
Well, it's
not.
it's an important movie, so these things happen.
Right here. Well, I don't want to, that's a key of mine. But the psychobiddy genre, among them are Hush, Hush, Sweet Charlotte, Whatever Happened to Aunt Alice, What's the Matter with Helen, and Who Slew Annie Rue. So there's 4 keys for you right there.
Yep, got those. Yep.
The main features of a psychobiddy were female stars from old Hollywood set in strange, gothic, and desperate plot lines that usually necessitated murderous outcomes. The sudden popularity of these productions was totally unexpected because the films featured no youthful glamour, no dashing heroes, no ingenues, no sex, and no nudity. And yet, it was a popular genre for a brief time in cinematic history. because of this film.
So one of my keys falls into that, but doesn't because of the handsome leading man thing or blah, blah, blah. And it's Sunset Boulevard.
Yes.
It's again about a fading star who commits murder.
I would go as far as to say that that's the biggest key of this movie.
Well, okay. No, because to me, the biggest key came out immediately to me is misery.
Misery is another one. Yeah.
The biggest key to me, even down to I'm in a wheelchair and I've got to get down the steps kind of thing. It's just like him trying to get to the door.
It's just not her biggest fan. She's probably her biggest enemy, but yeah.
She's not her biggest fan at all. No,
not at all. Just a little bit more trivia before we continue with keys. She's ranked as one of the 50 best villains in cinema history. The budget was so low that shots of Jane driving across town were actually Bette Davis driving in that makeup. So people would be turning heads and staring at her.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. She would drive down Hollywood Boulevard, and it says the expression of people's faces and other cars when they saw me were hysterical. Betty told these stories.
They didn't even cordon off the street. They just let her go loose and film it. Guerrilla. Yeah.
We also mentioned, and I can't get away from this without at least bringing it up a little bit. I know Tripp would kill me if I didn't, because I'm sure Tripp has seen Feud. But the antics these two got to behind the scenes, trying to not necessarily upstage each other, but trying to get in each other's head. The scene where Baby Jane is dragging Blanche across the floor, Joan Crawford put ankle weights in her dress to make herself heavier so that it would hurt Bette Davis's back when she had to and she would just be dead weight. So she would make herself way more so that it would be a pain for her. That was going on. Bette Davis would make fun of Pepsi Cola or something by bringing a Coke machine in because Joan Crawford had married the head of Pepsi Cola at the time, or had been. She inherited it, I think. And something else I had, Oh, the whole thing with the Oscars. Betty really thought she might win. And so Joan Crawford went behind her back and phoned up all the other nominees and said, I will accept on your behalf if you cannot be there. And she convinced Anne Bancroft to let her accept the Oscar. And so when Betty was in the wings, hoping to walk out on that stage and get that Oscar, Joan Crawford was there too. And when Anne Bancroft won, Joan Crawford went out there and walked off with that award in front of Betty. There was some mean ass shit going on.
Yeah, there were some petty bitches. I got to tell you.
Well, and Betty, but Betty always wanted to try to make things work. That's why Betty was willing to do Hush, Hush, Sweet Charlotte with her. But they also ended up having to fire her because it just did not stop. I think that's what she has is narcissistic personality disorder, if you're looking for a clinical term for what Baby Jane suffered from. And I think that's it. I had the thing also about Sunset Boulevard, but that's okay because we're in keys. Did you have any other keys?
I did. I had, well, we've already mentioned some. So we mentioned Misery, Sunset Boulevard, Grand Guignol. You mentioned Feud. You mentioned the other
that's all I have.
You mentioned the other movies that went from this, the
Psycho Biddies.
Whatever Happened to Alice, Who Slew Auntie Ruth. But of course, we still have to mention Hitchcock because he was a huge influence. We still have to mention Feud because obviously Ryan Murphy, is that it, was influenced by them enough to do that miniseries.
The book was called Betty and Joan, The Divine Feud, and it was by Sean Constantine. And then, of course, Ryan Murphy went and made it the first season of the show Feud, which I highly recommend. If you have not seen it, Susan Sarandon as Bette Davis is jaw-dropping. She is so good at it. But Jessica Lange is no bad actress at all either. She's quite wonderful as Joan.
I've got two final ones for this one. I've got one that's a stretch, but I think so, which is X. Just because you have this elderly person who ends up being the frickin' terror of the movie.
Right.
And the way the actress, if you haven't seen that movie, go watch it. I don't want to spoil everything, but the way the actress plays that is really strong and very, very good. Similar
Mia
to the late
Goth?
Davis. Yeah.
Yeah.
But my last one is M. Night Shyamalan. The whole plot changes once you have this final twist that you go, oh my God, the only reason, because we saw the car crash in the credits.
Yeah.
And suddenly now it's not true and it wasn't her. It was that big twist.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure that might have influenced M. Night the same way Sunset Boulevard does. I've always said Sunset Boulevard is great just because of that opening of, oh, by the way, that's me, I'm dead. That whole sort of.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The narrator's unreliable. Because
the narrator's dead essentially before the movie even starts.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, there's that.
Yeah, and that's one of my favorite movies of all time. And so probably another reason why I like this movie is because, like I said, it's a huge, huge key. Fading actress, decrepit mansion, weird shit going on behind the doors. There's a lot in that movie. Mm-hmm. It starts with the funeral of a chimpanzee.
Yep.
I only have one other key.
Sure.
And I lifted this one because I didn't know it. But her character was of the deranged child star, Baby Jane Hudson, is widely believed to be based on a former silent movie ingenue named Mary Miles Minter. Minter's career ended abruptly in 1922 when press coverage suggested she was a prime suspect in the still unsolved murder case of director William Desmond Taylor. Although she was never formally charged, Minter survived for decades afterwards as a progressively delusional recluse.
Ooh, that'd make a good movie.
No shit. Well, it's very much like the whole Fatty Arbuckle thing.
Yeah.
Too. With that
Speaking
murder.
of Coke.
Yeah.
No. Well, and we should also mention Shirley Temple in general, because I think that's who Davis was influenced by.
Well, especially the Daddy song. Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
And the curls, the look, everything. And Shirley Temple at the time, when she was at her height and being horribly abused by everybody around her in Hollywood, they had, Shirley Temple dolls that were these huge collectibles and all this. So it was
Creepy.
a big deal. And so
All right. Well, I guess that's probably going to do it for the first of these two films. Don't you think? We should at least spend a little time on the second one because I love it.
It's a little.
That brings us to 1964. 2 years later, Hush, Hush, Sweet Charlotte. We've already told you a little bit about it as far as the history. It did star both the women again, but Joan Crawford eventually got fired. And all the stuff that she got fired for, you can see in that miniseries Feud because they put it out in the light. As far as the synopsis, Charlotte Hollis is a semi-recluse and widely believed to be insane. 30 years earlier, her boyfriend John was brutally murdered. She was charged with the murder, but her wealthy, influential father managed to have the case dismissed. She is still haunted by John, thinking she sees or hears him at times, with the state government about to demolish her house and build a road and her resisting their attempts to get her to leave. Her cousin Miriam visits for a few days. The idea is to help her, but soon sinister and threatening events start occurring. As if these movies couldn't get more big stars in. This one's loaded. All the background characters are famous people.
Mm-hmm. Oh, such great cameos and some great supporting cast.
Yeah. As far as background, really quick, same team, basically. Robert Aldrich directed. The writer was Henry Farrell. Lucas Heller is, I guess, Aldrich's script doctor because he also worked on Dirty Dozen. Did you have different memories with this one than you did with Baby Jane? You said you didn't think you had ever seen all of Baby Jane. Had you ever seen all of this?
I had never seen any of this.
Really? Because I used to watch it a lot. I'm surprised you weren't at my house.
I remember coming in once and seeing the whole opening, you get off my land, and that whole thing with the shotgun and all of that. And I was going, what is this? And you were like, shh, it's Hush Hush.
You're probably thinking of a clip tape that David Farmer and I made with a bunch of movie
Maybe.
clips, because that where you are, I could spit in your eye with no strain at all.
Yeah.
We always had that on a clip tape. And the
Yeah.
vile, sorry little bitch line. You are a vile, sorry little bitch.
I do think this, just my opinions overall, I do think this movie is superior to Baby Jane. I think it's superior for a lot of reasons. The screenplay alone is more intriguing. It's better. It's very Gothic. It has this hidden mystery. It has the whole town turning against her feel to it, very Southern. So it has some other aspects that I think are strong to it. I think the performances are better. As you said, Davis was an accomplished actress and a dedicated actress. I think once de Havilland was in, she stepped up her game to match her. She knew she could just trounce on Joan because Joan was going to be weak and pathetic and all that, which would have been interesting, though. One of my first notes is I would really like to have seen some of the footage of Joan as the de Havilland character.
Well, you see one shot. It's very, very brief, and it's when she arrives in the car. That's Joan in the car.
Yeah. But to see I would have loved to have seen her interpretation of this. Because and it's me too. I can't see Olivia de Havilland without hearing Melanie from Gone with the Wind.
That's what's so great. It's that she's playing against type.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And
it's actually Charlotte that's the sympathetic one in this.
Yes.
And so
This
Betty's
also
getting to play
has-
sympathy. Yeah.
It has the conniving housekeeper, but this one, Agnes Moorehead is so good in this role. And Victor Buono is good again. Bruce Dern is in. Everybody's in it, and they're all great.
Yeah.
And I love the pacing. Again, the cinematography, very Hitchcock. Even a lot of these big, wide top angles looking down, the whole abrupt close-up cuts of the attack in the flashback scene, the whole dreamy, haunted feel to it is very Gothic. And so I liked it a lot.
Yeah. It's also filmed on location, so you've got a lot of legitimate settings and not sound stages as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. A little background.
When did you see it first?
This one I actively sought out after I saw Baby Jane in the 80s, and I had a copy of it because I loved it. I just thought this movie was the bomb, especially when you get to see a headless corpse walking down the stairs. I'm like, oh, not a headless corpse. It's like a zombie, the muddy zombie guy, or the head rolls down the stairs. All those are scenes that had I been a kid, I would have never forgotten. And maybe I did see it when I was a kid and just don't remember having seen the title of the movie. So anyway, I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan. I first saw it like I saw Baby Jane on video in the 80s. So Olivia de Havilland was friends with Bette Davis, and you find out some of this in Feud. She's played by Michael Douglas's wife, Catherine Zeta-Jones.
Oh,
and
Olivia de Havilland?
Yeah.
That seems
And
odd
Kathy
casting to me,
Bates
but-
is in it too. There's a lot of good people in this. Anyway, Betty called Olivia to talk her into doing it because she knew Joan was going to be fired or already had been fired. And Olivia de Havilland was well known for living in Europe. She had a house in France. Even when she died like last year and she was 100 and something, she still lived in France. And Betty, she didn't want to come, and Betty talked her into it, and she came, and that's how she ended up in this movie. And I think it's great because, like I said, seeing her cast against type and playing a villain, you don't know it right at first, but you figure it out pretty quickly. You're used to seeing her as Melanie or something from Gone with the Wind, Miss Sweet, Angel, whatever, and in this, she is just diabolical.
Well, until the screaming, though, at the end, she still has that same inflection that Olivia always had.
It's
That same
condescending,
kind of-
though.
It is, but it's still got that I'm sweet underneath it. It's like if she was saying, Scarlett, I hate your hair.
Yeah, but it's more like, poor Charlotte. Poor
Yeah.
Charlotte, let me help you.
Right.
You're like, no.
Right. And she and Cotton just have such great chemistry. So, and he is such a lecherous perv at first, and then suddenly realize, oh no, he's been in on this the whole freaking time.
Yeah.
So,
Do this one, once they cast Olivia to replace Joan, the reshoots inflated the budget to almost double of whatever happened to Baby Jane. It went from $1.5 million to $2.3 million.
well,
However,
I heard.
Go ahead.
I have in my notes that it wasn't just the reshoots that were expensive. He actually upped Davis's salary to do the reshoots. So,
I wonder if that had something to do with Joan not taking as much of the money or something.
Maybe.
They were both sleeping with him or had.
Okay, didn't know that, but sure.
Yeah. Even though it cost more, it did win more nominations. But like you said, it's a better film. Oh, I should probably switch to a different background. Any scenes? You want to talk scenes?
Oh, the opening is strong. The ending is strong.
Where I stand, I could spit in your
Yeah. Of course, the flashback to the murder is great and well done, and the way they shoot the party and the way they, like the picture you have there, the way they shoot her where she looks like she's having a really bad period, but it's really supposed to be blood from him. But
How are you with the dubbing in those scenes? Because that is clearly not Betty Davis.
clearly not.
She's
But it
younger,
didn't really.
but they use her voice.
It didn't really bother me in that respect, and I didn't mind that. I did find it interesting that he chose to do it so uniquely lit, so that we didn't know who that was. And it's like, but we know who that is. We know who's
Right.
having the frickin' flashback.
They just didn't
Of
want to
course.
cast a look-alike, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm sure that's why he did it. It's just, and it did add mystery to it. It did work. So I like that. I love the abruptness and the gore. I've even got in my notes, we cut a hand off in the first 10 minutes.
Yeah. And it's shocking, man, for that
Oh,
time.
yeah.
It's very Friday the 13th.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure in 64, it was like, what are we watching?
Right. Oh, yeah. It would have been the thing that parents would have freaked out over. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I like the two Mary Pickford scenes. I think they're really good. She has a unique delivery to be someone who came from silent movies.
You mean Mary Astor?
Is it Astor? No.
Yeah. Yeah. I was like, Mary Pickford's not in this movie.
Who is the lady who knows everything?
Are you talking about Jewel Mayhew, the one that was married
Yes.
to the guy that Charlotte was having an affair with?
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
Mary Astor.
Mary Astor. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. She's just really good in that I know
don't have a
something
picture.
nobody else knows, and very Southern feel to it. So I really liked that.
I'm going to say all the horror scenes. I love the scene with the muddy corpse of Joseph Cotton walking down the steps that finally
yeah.
drives her insane. I love the scene where Agnes Moorehead is, what's her name? Velma, maybe?
Agnes plays
Velma
Velma.
Crowther, that's her name. When she confronts Olivia de Havilland on the steps,
Oh, yeah.
and they're going up that staircase, and she's like, what is going on up there behind them closed doors? And then when she figures out what's going on, and Olivia de Havilland breaks a chair over her, and she falls down them steps. That is a great stunt. I was floored because it looks like she's basically killed no woman.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And very Hitchcock, very abrupt. So it worked really well for me. The only other scene I have is all the scenes with all the cameos. There's so many people in the back. I've got in my notes that this is like the cast of Andy Griffith, Star Trek, Bewitched, Batman, and the Waltons all got together.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
Because
you're right. You're like at the end with the old women talking as she's driving away.
oh yeah,
It's
and the
Grandma
kid,
Walton and like Clara, whatever her name is. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah,
and the
yeah.
kid from Star Trek and Miri,
Yes,
and you've got
yes, I forgot
Trelane.
about.
Trelane is in this movie, and you've got George Kennedy in this movie.
Yeah.
It's just, it's got a great
Bruce
cast.
Dern. Yeah.
Bruce Dern, yeah.
There's a lot of people in this movie.
It's
Yeah.
but Davis and de Havilland and Cotton, the three that are the primaries, do
The trio.
play each other really well. Their
Yeah.
scenes
It's
are
basically
strong.
those three and Agnes Moorehead as the like fourth, I would
Correct.
say. Yeah.
Correct.
And Jewel Mayhew is a distant fifth, the
Hmm.
Mary Astor character that you're talking about.
And in doing research, there was, well, the other guy too,
Victor Buono.
the journalist who is about to
Oh,
blow
that's
everything
right.
apart.
That's right. I forgot about him. Very familiar character actor.
And I guess we're ready for cast, but I had heard that in research that read a couple of places where people didn't like Agnes Moorehead. In their reviews, they said they thought she was awful, over the top, blah blah blah. And I was going, I thought she was really good.
I think she's fantastic. Her accent is a little thick,
Yeah,
but I
well,
don't
so
care.
is I could spit in your eye.
No shit. Yes. So there is a little bit of like overacting by both of them in it for sure.
Well, and Cotton thinks that he's doing Tennessee Williams.
You're
His
not
whole
kidding.
thing is this: I've got a drink in my hand. I'm just talking to you.
I used to be the love of your life. Yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
Well, we might as well talk about cast as we're there. I was trying to think if there were any other scenes though. I love that what is Olivia de Havilland's character's name?
Miriam.
Miriam. I love when Miriam makes Charlotte help her go put the body in the swamp.
Oh yeah.
She's so mean. And Charlotte's like, oh, I don't think I can do it. I don't think I can. You get out of that car.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, damn, Olivia, you go. She is
Well,
awful.
and that's when she really broke the mold, the whole Melanie mold for me was when in that last third, when she does turn into the manipulator.
And she kills Velma. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, love. Okay, cast. It includes 4 Oscar winners, including Mary Astor, Betty Davis, Olivia de Havilland, and George Kennedy. 4 Oscar nominees, including Victor Buono, Cecil Calloway, and Bruce Dern. Betty Davis, again, she is Charlotte Hollis. Really don't have to say anything else about her because we've already talked about her. But in this one, we have Olivia de Havilland playing her cousin Miriam. Now, I know Olivia de Havilland from Gone with the Wind and another 60s exploitation movie, Lady in a Cage, which is a movie I would cover on this podcast. I absolutely love that movie. And it's got James Caan in it, speaking of misery. However, I watched her in a movie not long ago that she's known for that was really good, The Adventures of Robin Hood. She plays Maid Marian in it. Other people were considered for her role. One of them was Barbara Stanwyck. I would think she would be immediately thought of as a villain. So I would think that would be bad. Vivian Lee, who absolutely adore, but she was busy she was going downhill by then because she had bipolar whatever. And after she did Streetcar, she started going downhill. So she wouldn't have been a good cast member. She would have been like Joan Crawford, probably too much of an insurance risk. And then Loretta Young was also approached for the role. All of these after Joan Crawford was considered ill and not able to do it. It's the second movie in which Olivia de Havilland stepped into a role originally announced for Joan Crawford. The other one was Lady in a Cage.
Okay.
So that's interesting that she would have been in that. Olivia agreed to make the movie because Robert Aldrich called Betty Davis to give her the good news. Oh, when she would agree to make it. Betty Davis called her to give her the good news and requested to keep it a secret until she returned in 2 days when he would legally inform Joan Crawford and her lawyer. However, Betty Davis didn't listen. She called a press agent who immediately leaked the story.
Yes.
She's such a bitch.
Yes.
But that's because of the whole Oscar thing, I guarantee it.
In all the research I did on this and looking into it, I didn't really think Joan did anything wrong. Basically, I think she was forced out by Davis in this movie. The way she would, because I've got in notes that Davis would sit beside Aldrich and critique Crawford's performance in scene.
That did happen. And she buddied up with Aldrich and started rewriting scenes to be lengthier for her.
Scenes and doing stuff. And there was one incident I heard about where the entire crew left the plantation site and went back into town or went back wherever, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And they left Crawford in her trailer back behind the building. And she wakes up from a nap and realizes she has no way even to get back into town.
Yeah, they also didn't pick her up at the airport when she got there. And it was on location out in like Louisiana or somewhere. Yeah, they did some mean things to her.
And the whole Coke-Pepsi rivalry, all of that. So, yeah, do I think Crawford took it to extreme? She should have probably gone to Aldrich and or one of the studio heads and said, this is what's happening and you're going to lose me if you don't do something. But instead, she did this whole publicity, take me to Senior Sinai. I've got heart palpitation.
My God. And that's basically what she did, was call in sick. And she kept calling in sick and kept costing them money until eventually they fired her through HR. Very similar to what we were talking about before we started this podcast. They had to use HR to force her out of this movie because she was basically faking illness.
And because of Davis calling up the press secretary, she found out about it from the news before she heard it from Aldrich.
Right.
So, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, there was a lot of drama. But once the drama passed, I'm glad they got Olivia de Havilland because I just think she's strong. I really think she's strong in this movie. Next would be,
Agreed. Totally.
Yeah. Next would be Joseph Cotton, who played Dr. Drew Bayless. We've already seen a Joseph Cotton movie this season. We saw Shadow of a Doubt just a few episodes back earlier this year. Joseph Cotton, I mentioned at the time I was never a big fan of his. I know he's part of the whole Orson Welles.
Yeah, he was. Group. Citizen Kane, baby.
I know, and so was Agnes Moorehead. Both of them were in the Mercury Players with Orson Welles. I wanted to tell you that I watched The Third Man the other day, and it was great. And he is in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so
again, Orson Welles.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I don't think Orson directed it though, but he's in it.
No, but he's in it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really good movie. Agnes Moorehead, as I mentioned, played Velma Crothers. We know her from other Orson Welles projects like The Magnificent Ambersons and Citizen Kane. Most people know her as Endora from Bewitched.
Mm-hmm.
And the Twilight Zone episode where she plays the giant to the little aliens on the roof. That's a very iconic.
The totally silent
Yeah.
Twilight Zone episode. There's no dialogue in that.
Yep.
Episode.
Very iconic episode. She was a wonderful character actress, and I loved her. So Calloway plays Harry Willis. He is the reporter that you mentioned that is there to find out really what happened back with this whole murder thing. And I kept thinking, what do I know him from? Well, you know what it is? He is Edmund Gwynn's cousin. Edmund Gwynn played Santa Claus in Miracle on 34th Street.
Okay.
So I was like, he's got that like Edmund Gwynn, who was the angel in It Happened One Night. The Christmas movie. It's a Wonderful Life. Yes, yeah. Thank you. He reminds me of that type of character actor.
He is. I think that would be the triumvirate of those three actors would be the ones that can play those roles.
It's just ironic that two of them are Christmas movies.
He was, excuse me. He was the scientist in Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. He's the doctor in that, the professor in that. And he's also in Harvey. He's Dr. Chumley in Harvey.
Okay. Yes.
And again, the same character. Edwin Gwynn could have played those roles.
As you mentioned, Mary Astor played Jewel Mayhew. Like Mary Pickford, who you confused her for, I think she was a silent movie actress. She definitely goes way back to early film. Victor Buono has a great little cameo in this movie as Charlotte's father in the flashback scene. Wesley Addy is Sheriff Luke Standish. He was also in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. He had a small part. William Campbell, who you mentioned, Trelane from Star Trek, plays Paul Merchant. Well, he was in a bunch of Star Trek. He was in Squire Gothos and Trouble with Tribbles, wasn't he? He was in more than one.
Koloff. He played
There you go. So we have William Campbell in there. Bruce Dern plays John Mayhew, the one that is murdered that you mentioned, who gets his hand and head cut off in the beginning of this movie. Very abrupt and stark entrance into this film. Frank Ferguson's the editor. George Kennedy is the demolition foreman that Betty Davis is shooting at the beginning of the movie when they are trying to bulldoze her property to make room for a road that is coming through. Of course, we know him from Cool Hand Luke, where he won an Oscar, but he was also in The Naked Gun and the airport movies. Yeah. Very, very, very familiar faces. And I'm not going to even go into the other ones, but like you said, there are Andy Griffith folks in this, there are Walton's folks in this, and there are other Star Trek folks in this. Lots of television cast people.
Well, and this was the time for it. Bewitched just, I think, started in like 63 or 64. So Bewitched had just started. And a lot of these supporting characters are in everything. Lassie and Bonanza and everything in the 60s. So
that's all I have for cast. As far as awards, the movie, as I mentioned, was nominated for 7 Academy Awards. This is another reason that made me say we have to do this movie. Because when I watched them, I didn't realize how acclaimed they were. I thought they were cult films. Agnes for supporting actor, cinematography, art direction, costumes, editing, original song, and music. None did it win, but Agnes did win a Golden Globe for supporting. The Edgar Allan Poe Awards gave it Best Picture of the Year, and it is not on the 1001 movies you must see before you die list, which I think is a shame because I would put it on there.
If you had to have a choice between one or the other, I would definitely put this one, not the other one.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
I would put them both on there.
Yeah, I know.
So any other trivia you want to get to before we get to keys on this one?
No, the only couple of trivia things I have are one. No, it's not trivia so much as a scene I forgot. In one of the flashbacks, the way he does the party scene, you can't see the faces of the people. It's almost like they're blurred out.
Yeah, it's weird. It's very creepy.
And I thought it was an optical effect, but I don't know how they would have done that in 64. So I was going, however he lit that was really cool with the focus or whatever he did, because it looked really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it reminded me of the creepiness of like that scene from Charlie X where the woman comes around the corner and she doesn't have a face.
Yeah. And maybe they did that. I don't know. They might have done that.
It's very strange.
No, the only other thing I did have that part of the negotiation once the whole Crawford debacle was over was Davis got paid more money. And it could have been that she got more of a percentage, because I know originally what the enticement was that, and I can't remember who, it's not in my notes, but either Joan or Betty would get like 25%.
Yeah, they had great back end deals
of this, and so
both of them had back end deals for Baby Jane. So they both,
but it was like 5%. It was something very small, and it was a big hit. So in this one, they were both given these whopping huge things. But anyway, my notes say that the equivalent came down to, in modern money, you paid Betty Davis $2.5 million to do this movie in 1964.
Yeah.
That's a huge amount of money.
Well, but you also got to remember, she was the one nominated for the movie the prior year.
Yeah.
So it's warranted when you think about it.
True.
It's just that back then they didn't do those things. I have a little bit of trivia. I mentioned that the theme song was nominated for an award. A version of it was performed by Patti Page at the 37th Annual Academy Awards, and it proved so popular that a 45 single of it was rushed into release, and it became a bestseller that peaked at number 8 on pop music charts that year, or the next year, whenever the Academy Awards were. The year of my birth.
Oh.
The song lyrics heard over the opening titles are chop chop, sweet Charlotte, chop chop till he's dead. Chop chop, sweet Charlotte, chop off his hand and his head. To meet your lover you ran. Chop chop. Now everyone understands just why you went to meet your love. Chop chop. To chop off his head and hand.
Well, Lizzie Borden. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it is very Lizzie Borden. Now that you mention it, that's
Yeah.
such a good key, actually. And then lastly, in my trivia, I've got that Laura Dern, daughter of Bruce Dern, said that this was the first film featuring her father that she ever saw. She freaked out when she saw her father's decapitated head roll down the stairs.
I'm sure that's what you do in the movies, Dad. They cut your arm and head off.
Yeah, that's hilarious. Very, very funny. All right, keys.
Whatever happened to Baby Jane?
Yeah, that
That's
is
key.
one.
I
Excuse
have
me.
Gaslight. Do you remember Gaslight? It was, and I think it was a play and then became a film. Might have been vice versa.
It's the whole reason we have that term, gaslighting.
Yeah, it's essentially convincing somebody that they're going crazy. And yes, that's where as far as keys and influences, yeah, that's where we get the term for our current czar.
It's a huge influence, and I have it recorded, but I haven't watched it yet. It's going to be watched by me in the near future.
Okay.
I'm going to put Lizzie Borden because that was a good key that I did not even think of.
Well, I also have in my notes, I have Friday the 13th because it starts Nightmare on Elm Street. Just for the chant, because it starts with 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you, which is that child singing weird, morbid stuff trope.
Yeah, this movie is definitely, you can tell by the keys already that this is more of a horror movie than the first one,
Oh, much more so.
which is probably why I like it better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The first one is much more of a suspense thriller. This one is much more horror or toward horror.
Yeah, it's psychological horror, I guess you would say.
Yeah.
But it's got gore. Friday the 13th is an apt key too. Those scenes
Yeah,
where
very.
the hand get hot or hacked off. That is very Friday the 13th.
Oh, yeah. I agree with that.
I have that. Most of mine I lifted from IMDb because I didn't know them. The painting of young Charlotte is actually from the movie Jezebel. So they took that painting because it was a young painting of her as like a Southern belle and used it, which
Okay.
worked perfectly. I guess it's more of an Easter egg than it is a key. But so the movie Jezebel, technically.
I've got To Kill a Mockingbird. Came out 2 years earlier in 1962, but it's that whole the kids are afraid to go into the house because a horrible crime was committed there trope. And that was like the Boo Radley house.
Or Halloween.
Yeah, or Halloween.
Yeah.
The Stand.
It.
Not The Stand, but It.
Yeah.
That whole, this is what the town thinks of it now. This is the haunted house of town
It is.
kind of thing.
But it's not in town really. It's out on an estate.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
everybody in town close to it is talking
Yeah.
about it. And by the way, did you notice that too? That came up in one podcast review I listened of this, that almost every place in town is named after them. Like I think the town is even Hollisport.
It sure is.
And it was, everything is Hollis something. So I was like, wow, okay.
Yeah. That's funny.
Bunch of money.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very similar, I think, in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. I watched it, and well, I don't know if everything's named after him, but he's very rich and owns everything.
Well, you could say that as well. The way Buono plays her dad is very Big Daddy.
Big Daddy.
Yes.
Yeah. Actually, you're right. The fact that it's set in the South.
Well, Tennessee Williams in general, because you also have the fading Magnolias feel. So
Yep,
you've got Glass
absolutely.
Menagerie.
Actually, you're right on it. I agree totally.
Would you say that Tennessee Williams writes Gothic plays?
I think he has a tendency to go there because Suddenly Last Summer is definitely somewhat Gothic. But as far as Streetcar or Cat on Hot Tin Roof, which are the two that he won Pulitzer Prizes for, I would say they're more
Southern melodrama?
almost magical realism. They're just,
Oh, well said. Yeah.
they almost operate above the average. They definitely are filled with purple prose, which is just beautiful language or whatever. But people don't talk that way, which makes it seem unrealistic or absurd in some cases.
Right.
The other day, Dennis came in and he said, "Is she crazy?" And he was talking about Katharine Hepburn and Suddenly Last Summer. I said, "No, not really. She's just mean." I said, "She wants to make Elizabeth Taylor have a lobotomy." How is that for a plot device? I have a problem with this girl, so we're going to get her a lobotomy. That's
Well,
a Tennessee Williams plot.
Yeah, and Glass Menagerie is the same way. That elevated dialogue, that pseudo, is she crazy, is she not, delicate flower thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
I could see that.
But they also cross over into a movie like this because of the language and the accents, the Southern accents and
Yeah.
everything.
Oh, yeah.
Because sometimes when you see Elizabeth Taylor in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, you're like, I don't think Southern people really talk that way. Not
Well, yeah,
all of
and
them, anyway.
In my watch notes, like halfway through, I was going, so is this like the anti Gone with the Wind, where Scarlett and the Melanie character are reversed, and Melanie's really the bitch, and Scarlett is
Yeah, a
the
little
nice
bit. It is a
know.
little bit because it's definitely a Southern movie on a big plantation. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah. So, and
And
Joseph
instead
Cotton
of
thinks
having actual slaves, though, they have poor old Agnes Moorehead, who looks
Yeah,
like
Velma.
she could see a doctor. She's kind of like deformed a bit.
and poor old Joseph Cotton thinks that he's, shoot, why am I blanking on his
Rhett
name?
Butler.
Rhett Butler.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, he's a little over the top in this. It's funny because I had to go back and look it up, like what exactly was their relationship, and it turns out he dumped her and she left town. Miriam,
Right.
that is.
Yes.
And somehow that romance gets rekindled when she needs him to help her get Charlotte into an asylum, which is very, very Tennessee Williams now that I think about it, because they are trying to put her in an asylum to get her money. And
Oh, yeah.
in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, they're trying to get the money. And Suddenly Last Summer, they're trying to get her institutionalized. It's very, very Tennessee Williams. It's a very apt description. I have Diabolique. Have you ever seen
I've never
that?
seen that film, but it came up in like two different reviewers who said that that was obviously an inspiration for this film.
Yeah, I watched it last summer when I was recuperating, and it is a creepy, creepy film.
It is
And
French, though, right?
It is. It's dubbed, or actually, I think I saw it subtitled. There is a fake drowning in that movie, but it's in a swimming pool.
Okay.
And there are similar shots with them putting the body in the river. So, because actually,
The only thing
the guy drowns and they hide his body in the swimming pool because it's winter and it's green, it's dark, so the water, you can't see the body down in it. And it's very similar in this where they hide his body in the swamp.
The only thing I had in
And
my
there's two
memory,
women.
in my weird memory bank from a go time about Diabolique was, it was, I think in his biography or his autobiography, Hitchcock talks about that's one of the ones that he missed. So he didn't, he was going to direct that film, or he wanted the rights to direct that film and missed out on it somehow. I don't know the details, but I just remember it was a Hitchcock regret.
It would have been a better movie.
Okay.
I like the movie and I understand why it's culturally significant because a lot of people like that movie, but I think it could have been better, especially with someone like Hitchcock behind it.
Interesting.
I can't remember who directed it. Was it Truffaut? No.
I don't think so. No, that's not a Truffaut title.
No. Anyway, it is about two women that commit a murder and then it ends up being staged and not a real murder at all.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a very similar plot. That's the last one I have, actually, as far as keys on these two.
The only other one I have, I couldn't rationalize or couldn't support. But somebody said that this movie reminded them of House on Haunted Hill, which is the William Castle film, wasn't it?
It is, excuse me. And the only thing I can think of is that you do realize that that's all set up too and not real.
Yeah, that he's faking everybody out, right?
He
in
is.
his haunted house.
He is. So I could see that being a key. It is definitely a similar theme.
Well, and it has some horror elements to it that scare you, and then later on you realize, oh my gosh, that was just a dream, or that wasn't right, or that was set up. So again, I think, especially for me, who doesn't like Bette Davis, to make her the sympathetic character in this, and to have me actually feel for her and not like Olivia de Havilland, that says a lot about the performances, the story, the direction, all of it. So.
You mean to not like Olivia's character?
Correct.
Oh, yeah, because I love her. I think she's great.
Yeah, but she normally
actress.
plays the sweet ingenue
Right.
thing, or the doting aunt.
Right, but you confuse me because you normally don't like Betty as an actress, but you're saying you do like
Yes,
Olivia.
I think she made great
Yeah.
choices in this one because when you're supposed to be at the beginning, I could spit in your eye, you're not supposed to feel sorry for her at all. But by the end of it, you do, and you realize, oh my gosh, this poor woman is just
crazy. Yeah.
being
She's being
fed
tortured.
all of this crap, and she's being tortured.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, well, that gets me. And we need to probably wind up, but the whole fact that Jewel Mayhew ended up being the murderer, and you obviously had to keep it a secret because you didn't want to go to jail, but she's like, I want you to give her this when I die so that she can read it. And then very much like the confession at the end of What Happened to Baby Jane on the beach, where she finds out she didn't actually cripple Blanche. In this movie, she finds out she didn't actually kill her boyfriend.
Right.
So I mean,
going
they
back
are
to Heller,
huge keys.
going back to Heller and M. Night Shyamalan, it's that final twist sort of
Right.
thing that you go, oh my gosh.
But Betty is so good as far as you feeling sorry for her in this movie. Like in scenes where she hears the piano playing downstairs because she thinks, well, who knows what she thinks? She's mad.
She's
thinks
being
her
haunted.
boyfriend's serenading her.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Great stuff.
All right. Well, that brings us to the end of this probably too long double feature, but we're
Yeah,
so
it
glad
went
you guys
long.
held on and listened to it. These are two incredibly deep films and have such huge production histories around them that we had to delve into all of that and go into all those little details. That's what Tim and I think. We'd love to know what you guys think, of course. So please comment down below. Which is your favorite? Do both belong on the 1001 movies or only one? And we'd love for you to, if you did like today's episode, if you're new to us, we have a plethora of stuff on the website, and you can find other films and go back and see other critiques that we have done and other episodes that we've done. And if you would like to support us and help us, we would love that. We have a Patreon that has some paid content as well as free content and some tiered content as well. And subscribe, like, do all those things. Thank you guys so much for spending time with us today. Tim, next week, is it scary? Is it sci-fi?
No, we are definitely going to sci-fi land, but we
Yeah.
have a very common theme with this week. With Oscar winners, there's some strong acting in next week's as well. So
And a complex production history.
very complex and controversial, very controversial production. Yes.
So that's a good tease for you guys out there. Come back next week for a controversial science fiction film that will be.
There you go.
Tim, I'll see you then.
All right. Sounds like a plan.
All right.
All right. Bye.
You can't start the car. Johnny has the keys.